Thanks for listening to the Drummers Weekly Groovecast. You can contact Phil and John at their Twitter page at twitter.com/Drummers Weekly Groovecast or their Facebook page at facebook.com/Drummers Weekly Groovecast.
Good evening.
I am warning you right now, if you touch my drums, I will stab you in the neck with a knife.
Ain't a bucket. Ain't a bucket.
Mom!
Take it easy. Lower it.
I'm not gonna lower it. I have to do this now.
I don't mind you playing it, but lower it.
Everything get straightened out?
No, we had a problem. I mean, we tried to do everything we could.
What do you mean?
Well, you know what I mean.
Next!
Little trouble there. You're rushing.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
Yeah!
Hi, John. How are you?
Phil, doing good. I had a day of preparation.
Do tell.
Oh, just dumped a bunch of tunes in my lap, learned these, and to hear the gigs. And so, per our last conversation, I was knee deep in our advice, and I think I did okay.
See, kids, we are not the proverbial, what's the old saying? Do what I say, not what I do. We actually do what we say.
Yes, we
right?
We have to.
We have to.
It's not like it's some noble thing. It's out of like not making fools of ourselves and getting called back. So let's call a spade a spade.
Absolutely. And to kind of elaborate on what John's talking about, what actually happened this week. He's had a crazy busy week this week. And he had a whole pile of gigs dumped on him at pretty much the last minute, right?
Yeah.
And John, just tell him kind of what you've been doing.
Well, it was a producer friend of mine, a project he's working on, and they needed to make some changes with personnel, kind of step up the game a little bit, and thankfully he trusts me to be a part of that. So a lot of original stuff, which you just got to dig in and learn. That's just how it is, Did
you make some charts?
Yep, I did. I charted everything, even some of the, covers that were pretty true to form, but just for comfort and the amount of tunes, it's almost 2 hours of music. So that in itself makes it worthwhile to just kind of lock it down and have those notes and maps and charts to ease that pain and the concentration level and all that. But just coming in prepared, as we talked about, I mean, there were songs we played once because they just went well and everybody came ready to get on it and prepared. And it was really cool to really kind of just be in the middle of that after we talked about it. And, I did my part, and fortunately everybody else did their part. And we went to lunch early on the second rehearsal.
Early lunch is,
I love it.
See there, our fellow podcasters, you got our guys here that's talking to you. We're practicing what we preach,
Yes. And it just, man, it makes things a lot easier.
Yeah.
You're not. Oh yeah, what happened on that bridge? And this is a gig too where, there were 4 or 5 tunes kind of in a real similar tempo kind of vibe, musically, and that stuff can really run together when you're cramming and it's all, coming at you fresh and all that. So all that extra effort made it worthwhile.
Did you fall back on your metronome from time to time there?
I used it the first day 111% of the time. And probably more than anything just to make me bulletproof and not have someone question anything. But it's just a great equalizer too when you're talking about 4 players who've never played together. Mm-hmm. All great, everybody having their act together, but man, it just kind of keeps things in check. And I was the only one referencing it, which sometimes can be difficult, but when it's really good players, you know, I've been in situations where you're kind of bagging at a verse and a chorus in because you almost have to. But man, I did, you know, a 3-hour rehearsal the other day and pretty much leaned on that click the whole time. So that's a good sign.
Well, we wanted to open up today with that little bit just to show you that we are men of our word when it comes to following our own advice. But also, before we jump into today's topic, just wanted to say that the response so far from all the folks that have listened to the first 2 episodes, it has been quite gratifying. We greatly appreciate your response, your helpful little tips when it comes, especially to the audio engineering portion. Which, by the way, John, I would like to tell you, I got and I will say that it was a friendly phone call, but with somewhat of a terse tone. That was a engineer friend of mine called me today. Had listened to it, and he's somewhat of a button-up fellow, right? You know, but you know, he I think the exact words he called me an audio engineering neophyte.
You know what that makes me? A radio listener.
But the basic thing was he was trying to be very clinical. He tried to put on his white lab coat and his clipboard and sit down and tell me the error of my ways upon recording the podcast, even though he did give a hearty thumbs up to the content, which I think we can stick our chest out a little bit on that so far. So that's
good.
Pretty good.
I really, man, at the end of the day, come on. That's what's going to drive the interest, you know. And even, I mean, the first one we did, I didn't even notice plosives.
What's a plosive between friends, right?
What? And of course, after it was pointed out, I noticed it. Yeah. But, you know, man, be engaging, and hopefully we touch on plenty that, you know, that kind of stuff is really not going to be.
Well, you know, when you and I first started talking about this, the entire concept was we wanted it to be different from other podcasts. We wanted it to be like when we're hanging out, like if we're having lunch, if we're just talking on the phone, we're just talking about shop. We're talking about, you know, things that matter to other drummers and other musicians. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times we don't see or don't hear those kind of things covered really in any format. Honestly, a lot of times, I mean, you know, let's just be honest, when it's with drummers, if we're talking educational stuff, we're talking about patterns and rudiments and stuff. Very seldom do we talk about conceptual things, which is, in my opinion, sorely lacking in our educational community. Or the other aspect we talk about is gear, which we do talk a little bit on here about. Mm-hmm. And then we also have therapy.
True. You know, I think it's really, it ultimately comes down to, this is sort of a continuation of a million conversations you and I have had. Mm-hmm. And of course, we've had with other drummers. And, you know, in saying that, it's like, God, I wish we were rolling tape on 50 conversations we've had before, because just some incredibly, you know, focused and useful and just engaging stuff that we've talked about for years. And I have with plenty of people, just going to lunch with a few drummers and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, you know, mm-hmm. In jumping into this, I'm like, God, man, if I would have recorded, you know, conversations from the past, this would be it'd be so fun to listen back. And
well, I've always thought that the reason this hasn't been done, or that I'm not aware that it's been done before in the past, is that I think a lot of people, they feel like the other listeners may not find it as engaging. And honestly, I really didn't kind of know what to expect either. But so far, every response that I've gotten has been extremely positive from the standpoint that it is what it is, and that we're not, sitting here talking about, the inner workings of a goofadiddle, which was brought up in that conversation today, by the way, that we're sitting here talking about conceptual things and things that could apply, of course, to drummers, but to other musicians as well. And therapy.
That.
By the way, John is wearing a white lab coat and a clipboard, and I am laying prone for this podcast. So take with that what you will.
Sounds kinky.
But today, we'll go ahead and dive into our topic for the day.
Let's do it.
Yeah, and this is a topic you're going to get some vastly varying opinions on, because you're going to be listening to two fellas that have taken two separate paths. And those paths are the way we did our education, the way we learned how to play drums, that sort of thing. And so, and by the way, let me say this, this path that we're talking about is not necessarily talking about, kids who are 8 or 9 years old that are picking up sticks. We're talking about when you get a little bit older, when you get to be your late teens or so, and you have to start making some hard decisions about life. In other words, are you going to try to do this for a living? And if you are going to try to do this, how are you going to educate yourself? And, quite honestly, the two primary ways to go about doing that is to attend some kind of a higher learning institution, a college, a trade school, that sort of thing, or to get some on the road, on the job experience. Go out and just start playing. And I took the former, which was go to college and learn music that way. And John took the latter. He went out, started playing on the road, started playing gigs, and we both, have got ample experience on both sides of the fence there, and we're going to talk to you about it and kind of how we arrived at it and how it's in a lot of ways changed also since, since when we first started. So to kind of jump off and get started on this, the first thing, and it cannot be underestimated, is you have to have a decision on exactly what you want to do, or you have to decide what path you want to take. And basically, I think that you can kind of boil it down in a few different ways. And you can either choose, hey, I want to try to be this well-rounded musician that plays a whole variety of different styles. Anytime the phone rings, I want to be able to pick it up and say, yeah, I feel comfortable doing this job. I'm going to try to educate myself as much as possible through all these different styles that I may not be aware of. And then that kind of leads you towards the path of going into a college situation or some kind of a higher learning institution for music. And then another different pathway, or maybe the big fork in the road, is, say, someone who decides, I am done with school, I'm tired of school. In fact, some people just hate school, and I'm a good player. I might have my own band over here. I want to try to make it big or try to make a break with this band. And let's just be honest, every day you're not trying to make it with that band is pretty much a day lost, because as we all know, it's not a mystery that there's somewhat of a shelf life, age-wise and whatnot for that. So there's a path of, hey, I've got to go out on the road. I got to get some on-the-job experience. And so, first off, if you can kind of decide which way you want to go with that, you've probably got you're better off than, I'd say, 75% of most people, because a lot of people just don't know what they want to do.
Right.
Yeah,
that's hard. It is. I mean, it's hard at that age, no matter what your passion is or what you think you want to do or where you want to end up. Sometimes you think you have it all figured out when you're 18 years old and your parents are dumb and they unfortunately get really smart in about 4 or 5 years.
Or 30.
Yeah, that too. But it's a man. We're getting into some strange territory just in the simple fact that we know 18-year-olds that are focused and mature and know exactly what they want to do, and we know 18-year-olds that they're just thinking about what's going to happen Friday night, and neither of those are wrong. But as a musician, it really would serve you well to sit down and think about what kind of drummer you want to be or musician you want to be, but we're specifically talking drums. What is it you want to accomplish? And that's going to dictate somewhat. There's always exceptions to the rule, but that's going to certainly give you a clearer picture about the path you should probably take.
Yeah, absolutely. And one aspect that we didn't even touch on, and I certainly don't want to gloss over this, but if you're a drummer that decides that they want to be a teacher of some sort as well, whether it be a band director or especially a college level teacher or professor, you absolutely have to go down the route of higher education to be able to do that. There's just no question about it. So it's doubly important for somebody who even thinks they have an inkling that they want to do that they kind of get their head screwed on correctly and start figuring out how they want to go about doing that. And so I can speak from my experience on what I wanted to do and kind of how I went about doing it, and hopefully kind of shed a little bit of light on how that is also somewhat valid today, if not completely valid today. I chose, I guess, when I was about 16 or 17 years old, that was the path I was going to take. I was going to go to school and learn as much as I could because, quite honestly, where I grew up in a rural southern town. And, the only thing that I knew was that I didn't know enough. And it was one of those things that I absolutely had to make some decisions on what I was going to do, because coming out of that town and not knowing enough as far as like not knowing enough about not only the music business but how to actually play my instrument to where I could gainfully employ myself pretty much sealed my path with what I wanted to do. And I liked school also. That was another thing. That was another aspect of it. So from that time, I had to kind of make some choices as far as like what kind of school that I wanted to go to. And 25 years ago, that was a big deal. Today, that is an enormous deal because tuition rates 25 years ago were honestly a drop in the bucket compared to what they are now. I teach students that I've sent to Berkeley, and I've sent some to Eastman, and I've sent some, of course, to state schools as well. But I tell them about when I went to school, and their mind just explodes when I tell them they almost like pull their wallet, like they have enough money in their wallet to pay for when I went to school. But it's very important to kind of decide the type of school you want to go to, and quite honestly, you have to really figure out your budgetary constraints on it. And I have kind of made a little list. There's kind of the great dividing line of 3 different types of schools and the monetary impact they have on you. And first and foremost, we've already mentioned just straight up music schools. These are schools that teach music. Professional musicians teaching, and that's all they teach. You've got schools like Berkeley and Eastman and Juilliard. In these schools, quite honestly, it's big bucks. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you want to draw a comparison, it would be somewhat like the Harvard of music schools, so to speak, even though Harvard does have a music program. But with that, John, comes a price.
Significant at this point.
A hefty price indeed, yes. Yeah, I just had a student that graduated there a few years ago.
At Berkeley?
From Berkeley, yeah. And I don't know, his situation, he was a great player, and he was on scholarship almost the entire time that he was there. But if I were going to be a guessing person from the standpoint of if you were not on scholarship, if you were paying full tuition out of pocket, and then when you add your living, your housing and stuff up in Boston, you could very easily be a cool $250,000 light by the time you get done. And you're a musician when you get out of there.
He's going to probably need to be a jazz musician and cover that nut, right?
John, I actually tried to stay quiet on that to like leave a nice pause.
Sorry, man. I'm just,
for dramatic
I can't,
effect.
You know.
Yeah. But
I think I just find it entertaining that Berkeley is maybe the most expensive school, and it's focused on jazz. You know, the reputation on it. It's kind of like, if you know the reality of that, it's like, it's tough.
And it is. I've been to Berkeley several times up there, and let me tell you, it is quite the impressive place. Mm-hmm. I mean, the facility, you put it to you this way. Once you spend that money, I suppose you know where that money went, because it is, as far as the campus and the facilities that are there, the equipment that's there, it's almost, you almost actually do yourself a disservice because in the real gigging world, a lot of times the studios and the equipment are not as good as what they have at school.
True.
I mean, Berkeley is top notch when it comes to that type thing. I mean, the studios there are amazing.
Yeah, they better be.
They had better be. Mm-hmm. But John and I had this conversation a few weeks ago, and what I tell my students when they come up, the really serious ones that I have, and we have this conversation that we're having on this podcast right now, I sit down and I tell them, I'm like, there's really only a couple of reasons why you go to Juilliard or why you go to, Eastman or Berkeley or Curtis School of Music. And that's pretty much because you're going to be networking and going to school with a whole bunch of students that are of like mind with you. And, if you did go to a state school, which we're going to get into here in a second, you would be going to school with like-minded kids too, but it would be 1/100th of the amount of students, right?
Right.
And John and anybody will tell you that the people that you come up with, whether you go to school with them or even if you go out on the road with them when you're young, chances are you will probably be working with some of them the rest of your life. And that's the way it is with me. I mean, I went to school at two different schools for undergraduate and graduate degree, and I still work with some of those people.
Yeah. My best friend I met when we were freshmen in college.
There you go.
We played together for 32 years.
Yeah.
In a number of different settings. It is really true.
Yeah. So, you pay for these fabulous facilities, and then you pay to be with a whole bunch of other students that are similar mindset as you, that hopefully want to do the same things that you do. You guys work together for a long time after that. And that actually, John, that actually includes the faculty as well.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely dealing with the faculty in that same way because, there's been times that I've played with plenty of faculty members at schools that I've gone to too. And let's face it, they're great at recommending you for other teaching positions if you wanted to do that.
True.
So,
and playing as well,
right.
Like a lot of them are out playing. So
absolutely.
There's just, even just in the gig world, it's not just your peers.
Right. And then I tell them the flip side of the Berkeley thing, and that is you're going to be very light in your wallet once you come out of it. And then the other thing is this, let's just be completely and totally honest about things like just classwork. You're going to study music theory. You're going to study ear training. You're going to study music history. You're going to study instrumentation, orchestration. You're going to do all that at any other state school that you go to as well. And the theory at that school is the same as the theory at University of Illinois, which is the same at the University of Colorado, which is the same at University of South Carolina. Theory's theory. Everybody teaches it maybe just a little bit differently, but I mean, when you're doing figured bass, it is what it is.
Curriculum, too, is dictated on some level.
Absolutely.
From the powers that be. So there is going to be a pretty similar thing by way of what they're teaching. I mean, it's still, I think, still the most rewarding part of going that path is going to be the level of players you play with, the level of players you are developing relationships with. And I mean, a lot of, we just mentioned earlier tonight how many people went to Berkeley and mentioned all these other insane players that were there when they were there. And it's just an endless, it's really true. There's going to be some of that. And that can be beneficial,
Absolutely.
And, I mean, bragging rights are cool too.
Well, you get into that whole thing also, like we talked about teaching a few minutes ago. Mm-hmm. Let's just be honest. Most of the time, whenever you get a degree, have you ever been on a gig where anybody's ever asked to look at your degree? No. The only time that the degrees are necessarily valid is when you go to apply for a teaching job.
Yeah, that's true.
That Juilliard diploma looks pretty good.
Yeah.
Then at that point,
Yeah, I've had some friends that have been incredibly frustrated about the amount of debt they had, and in our typical jaded fashion, they might be like, "Yeah, I got my degree and I'm on the same gig as you, John." And that's a real reality that can creep into your mindset if you're talking about, now way more than when we were, looking at schools and all that. But I mean, there are people coming out of school now. I mean, I just got a Consumer Reports. Like, my parents gave me a subscription to that, and the entire magazine this month is based on this problem with student debt, and
mm-hmm.
it's a major issue right now, and it's probably going to get worse. But there's definitely it's got to be part of your decision.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have to be realistic about shouldering that and truly wanting to accomplish what you want to accomplish. Is it possible?
Right.
It very well could be.
Mm-hmm.
It's not impossible, but just being aware of it, making sound decisions is a great thing.
Right. I know that. I don't know of anyone, I should say, that likes being in debt. I know that coming out of a place like that, being that far in debt, and especially if you wanted to go get a master's degree after that and incur more debt, that would be a hard thing for me to live with,
It probably was when you did it.
Yeah, But, the other side of that we were talking about a few minutes ago is the state school. Mm-hmm. And we've already kind of compared and contrasted those two, as far as like the music school and the state school, with the biggest things being, it should be significantly cheaper from that standpoint. That is, especially if you stay in state. Now, out of state, the gloves are off. Got to make a wise decision there. Right. But you get then the thing of what we talked about of, you're going to be in there with some hopefully some like-minded folks as well that want to do the same thing that you want to do. It's just the pool will be a lot smaller with that. Hopefully you get lucky like I did, and you end up getting into a very vibrant program where it hits just at the right time. Speaking of choices, the choice that I made, it was an informed choice, but it was a lucky choice too. Mm-hmm. At the time when I got my undergraduate degree, I was at a school at a time where the faculty was very engaged, and we had a very engaged student population. I mean, we had some real go-getters that were
a real fertile environment.
Very fertile environment. And, I kind of took that for granted and until I left that school, to get my master's degree, and then went to the opposite end of the spectrum. And I just thought that all schools were like that, and that's not the case, brother.
No. As we kind of were just going on about earlier with that, it's kind of like a lot of programs, football programs, as for an example, mm-hmm. other than the Alabamas and the Michigans and the Ohio States. You you kind of have your ups and downs, as most of us who grew up fans of
Right.
most state schools
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
It's kind of cyclical at best, and I think music programs can be that way as well. At the same time, like a reputation of a specific school. I mean, I'll just take Atlanta, for example. I can think off the top of my head 4 or 5 guys who went to the University of Georgia, which is never mentioned as a music school of note,
Right.
that are some of my favorite musicians in this town.
Yeah.
I mean, bar none. And that's just gifted individuals who ended up there. Maybe it was financial. Maybe it was, the scene in Athens was attractive to them beyond school.
Right.
But nonetheless, there were some fertile periods that school had, and we see and benefit in this town to a period or two of that. So, I always kind of think, I've had conversations with people where they're like solely interested in a school because of the reputation of the ensemble.
Mm-hmm.
That's a real iffy thing, because like in North Texas is a perfect example. Well, there's some really great, the top couple bands are amazing. It gets a little more average as it comes down. Still really high level and all that. But is it really wise to be focused on the ensemble reputation of the school? Maybe not. I personally think, outside looking in and knowing what I know now, an individual teacher is going to benefit you a great deal more than the reputation of some amazing ensemble, because any halfway decent music school, the big band's going to be pretty solid.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to suck.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be 20 guys that can play at a pretty high level, and the experience is going to be beneficial to you.
Right.
So that factors into some decisions here in higher education, that there can be some pitfalls and some,
Right.
false narrative as far as what's important.
Absolutely. And you made a fantastic point about the individual teacher, like a private lessons teacher. Let me tell you, you can make or break a college experience with that. And one thing in particular that I think this is good to kind of tie up the thing about the music school versus the state schools. When you have a huge student body at a school like a Berkeley or Eastman or where you've got just a whole ton of incoming freshmen, the marquee names that you see at these schools, as these teachers, chances are you will never see them, or very seldom will you see them.
Yeah, definitely
Right?
not long-term one-on-one.
Exactly. Those are reserved for, of course, upperclassmen, if not even graduate students. And a lot of times those guys are working professionals, and they're on the road quite a bit,
That's a good
at
point.
that time. So that can knock the shine off of a lot of those schools, and can also knock the shine on a state school in particular if you have if there's one particular applied music teacher that you really mesh with, which I did, ended up being my mentor, that's almost a whole nother topic for a podcast, talking about mentors and the importance of them. And, that kind of thing, finding that right kind of teacher by shopping around a little bit and not necessarily looking at the marquee names can be very beneficial for sure.
Yeah. Well, I can speak from experience in that in my very short-lived, experience with college, I went somewhere where the reputation of the ensemble was pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Long history of success and just high level. And the individual percussion instructor was just a world-class marimba and mallet player, legitimate stuff, but really focus on like the Japanese marimba stuff that, really heady, difficult.
Yeah.
And I had no interest in any of that. I mean, that was like, I wanted to play drum set. We'd sit down finally for a lesson on the drum set, and we'd do a little playing, and he'd be like, "Oh, what'd you just do there?" And I was a little bit better than average freshman drum set player,
Right.
college,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it was like, oh, I'm, and I didn't want to be there to begin with, so that was just like fuel to the fire,
Yeah.
and it really was a poor decision on my part. Like, I did no research into, I just was thinking about, I got to get in that jazz band, man.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Well, and then there's a long and sordid history by way of that audition process and the politics.
Oh,
that
yeah.
We don't need to get into, but a whole decision, a awful decision for me personally.
Right.
So there's a lot to consider, and now especially when you're talking about this money, man, go out of your way to figure this out for you as an individual.
Absolutely, which is the perfect segue for me to bring in the last school, or the last type school I want to talk about. And this is going to be the school that will be the last or the least amount of money that you're going to have to come out of pocket with, simply from the standpoint that it's a shorter term of time that you spend in school. Mm-hmm. And that would be the musical technical school or the musical vocational school. Those are schools like Percussion Institute of Technology, PIT, Drummers Collective up in New York, and AIM, Atlanta Institute of Music. Mm-hmm. And these schools, by no stretch of the means, are cheap. It's just that, again, a lot of times you're dealing with maybe a 1-year program, maybe sometimes a 2-year program, with this. So just by virtue of the schools, the school term being significantly shorter, you come out not owing quite as much money if you have to go that direction. Now, my experience with these schools, I can take them or leave them. I think, again, you have to kind of really know what you want to do. And the biggest thing I think that people should be aware of is when you come out of this school, you kind of get the proverbial certificate of completion. Thank you for participating, is what it is. And what did Chris Farley say? That and 50 cents will get you a nice hot cup of Jack squat.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
This is a little, I'll let you.
Yeah. So the biggest thing that I think that...
To be honest, we have a lot of friends involved in it.
Oh, absolutely.
Music school of that sort and that ilk. And so I
used to teach there.
Oh, well, then hey.
I'm
going to go get some bourbon.
Yeah.
And we're going to get to the bottom of this.
Yeah. No, well, basically, the main thing that I will say about it is this, is that these are very, very pointed schools from the standpoint of the agenda of what they have you do. It's like I said, most of these are 1-year programs where you have these different levels of completion that you have, like a level 1, a level 2, a level 3, a level 4, broken down into quarters, and you kind of just meet these levels of completion to go on. Now, that's not to say that some very successful people haven't come out of there. They absolutely have. But to me, one of the things, if you're going to study, there's something about studying over a longer period of time. In other words, allowing the experience of school, trying to milk as much out of these programs as you can. It's very difficult to mature that much and learn that much and really be able to absorb it in a year. It really is. Mm-hmm. And quite honestly, my experience of the type of academic, and I'm talking about musical academic programs that they have in these schools, it's not quite up to snuff. The things like the theory and the ear training, that type of stuff, the orchestration, instrumentation.
Condensed.
Yeah, it's very condensed, and even at some of the schools, they have they literally call it theory for drummers. In other words, it's theory for idiots. is really what it is.
Yeah.
You know? And so I mean,
sense.
I have some issues with that, you know. I just feel like that if you want to go that route, it is a valid route. It wouldn't be the route that I would have most students take. I think it actually could be a good route, almost like a junior college thing. Mm-hmm. Hey, let's try this for a year. And if it doesn't totally blow me out of the water, and, you know, if I can kind of get into the hang of what it's sort of like to be in School of Music, you know, maybe I can move forward from there.
Yeah.
And actually, there have been some students that have done that.
You know, I think some of it too, that really condensed curriculum of that. The one thing that, even though people will say, oh, you get a lot of information and this, and, you know, it's really focused on specifics and all that. Well, that's true, but I think in a lot of ways, if you're gonna go the education route, a longer term scenario just to me seems to make more sense for the simple fact that it kind of allows you in a controlled and less competitive in the true sense of life. It allows you to sort of find your place and in yourself and your strengths, and, you know, it also gives you time to really kind of get an idea of what I want to do, because, you know, like, there's just a lot to be said for having not done it. You know, it's kind of appealing to think like, man, if I'd have had those 4 years to just kind of really focus a little more on, you know, what it is I want to do, and instead of just being dropped in the fire like I was by choice. Right. You know, like there's some comfort in that to me looking back. You know, the grass is always greener maybe, but wow, you know, 4 years, for a year, you know, you're still going to just be like, you're going to the wolves immediately. And,
you know, yeah, John, you were really hitting on another point that I tell a lot of my students, is that when you've got that 4 year, when you got that 4 year period of time that you're working on your craft, you're studying your craft, you're surrounded by all these people, it is also the absolute perfect time to kind of wean your way into the gigging professional world.
True.
You know,
opportunities,
right?
Definitely
you're kind of
themselves.
Yeah, you're working yourself through school, so to speak, doing that, and taking on a little bit of gig life as it comes along as well. And so, you know, it gives you a kind of a cushion of time to do that. And if you happen to be in a school that's in a large metropolitan area, if it's an area that you decide you want to set up shop in, for lack of a better term, you've gotten 4 years for free establishing yourself in that city.
That's a good point.
So,
you know, another thing too that is far more common now than used to be is some practical experience that a lot of times a lot of schools didn't have, was studio. And I know where I'm going to say where I enrolled in school, because that's about the extent of it. Yeah. There was a studio, a commercial music program, one of the first and earliest. And even in my just rebellious and horrifically misguided period of time in being at that school, I somehow slipped into like doing sessions and learned so much that it was low pressure, it was student projects and all that, versus, you know, like when I came out and I started actually doing some sessions, it was really valuable. So there's some things that above and beyond technique and above and beyond reading and ensemble playing that there is now, and some experience you can get. And imagine if you were in a program where you got to record regularly for 4 years without the fear of this producer blackballing you or this artist dogging you and all. I mean, that's incredible in and of itself, you know.
You know who did that exact same thing when he was in college?
You.
No.
Who?
I wish.
You didn't get as much of that.
John Robinson.
Well,
He was
you can tell.
Yeah, he was a Berkeley guy. He did a whole ton of sessions when he was in school there.
It's just gold.
Yeah.
Obviously, it paid off.
A little bit.
I think he's paid off his tuition.
You think so?
I'm pretty sure. I'm Facebook friends with him. I'm gonna ask him, but I kind of think that he doesn't owe Berkeley any money.
You know what I heard? I heard that he did one of those weird things, man, where he got on, and I'm using my air quotes, he got on with the Quincy Jones Corporation, and as part of his pay, they paid off all of his student debt, kind of like a doctor.
Well, I know if I produced a record like Off the Wall and John Robinson played it as well as he did, I'd pay off the student loans in his house, and because I'm going to make a whole bunch more than that.
By the way, what I said was a big whole boatload of crap.
We should have just let that one.
You let that one go?
That could have grown into this. Man, do you know Quincy Jones bought John Robinson an island, a whole island, and a plane to get there, and he had in his house. John Good took a tree from the island and made him a drum set, which is cool. And then Quincy also, he surrounded the island with sharks. So all of these a-hole drummers trying to get John's work couldn't make it on the island. And John just did all his sessions on the island. Did you know that?
Well,
Sorry,
man. Well, on top of that, I heard that Carol Collado and John Good went into a death match for the last bit of wood on that island to make products for him.
Okay.
Well, anyway, look, I think we have
a hint of things to come on our Pub Crawl podcast.
Exactly. I think that we have done a fairly good job talking about the different types of colleges and kind of what they offer, what you can expect to pay as well, or at least get you in the ballpark, as kind of what to expect when you get out of school, what's going to be facing you. And you know what? There is one last thing I do want to wrap it up by saying, listen, it's a given that if you're going to go and you're going to study in school, that you're going to do your best and that you're going to put some serious time and effort into it. Take it a step further. Do yourself a favor. Explore every possible option that you can find to get scholarships, grants, any kind of help that you can get to pay off school. Get those things and then work hard to keep them, because the majority of the scholarships that you end up getting, if you are awarded one, if you just keep doing well, you keep them. In other words, it's not like most of them don't kick in for a year and then, that's the end of it. Mm-hmm. Most of them are ongoing. They're like endowments, that type thing.
Provided you're bringing your...
Right. And I mean, right. I was on scholarship all of my undergraduate school, and that's the only reason why I came out without owing any money, was because of that. That, and also that, my tuition was basically the cost of a week's worth of Happy Meals, when I went to school.
Well, listen, we have touched on, this higher education subject and, the options and all that. And I would like to, just for conversation's sake, ask that at some point we kind of get into more of your experience with that.
Sure.
And we can do that down the road, and I think it would do, especially some of our younger drummer friends and listeners that we hope latch on, a really clear picture of what that is, because while we're giving advice about, hey, here's what you can do and all that, having a clear-cut picture of what that entails is a part of making a decision as well. So
absolutely. And let me say this, but before we jettison it and move on to another topic, is that I can tell you for sure that there are a lot of things that have changed since I've been in schools. But there are a lot of things that there's some all truisms as well. In other words, things that have not changed. And the one thing that I've always thought it was absolutely hilarious. And I know guys that think the way I'm going to talk about here in a second. It's funny. There are a lot of guys that, especially older veteran guys that never went to school, that think that it's some kind of like it's like this high society, very clinical type thing where you go to school and everybody, the professor's talking like British accents and all this stuff. And it's not that, it's not the, Mr. Jordan, would you play quavers on your Gran Casa? It's not that at all, right. But I think it's hilarious because there are people that think it's that, and it couldn't be further from that.
I always kind of was hoping I'd find the music school where it's like Donald Sutherland's character in Animal House, all of my professors, which, I mean, as far as the music school goes, that's not out of the realm of possibility.
It is not.
So, but, that's just a little.
So we're going to make this a part A and B podcast. Next podcast, our main topic will be the other side of this education. We'll call it, this is the rock and roll side, this is the do-it-yourself side of education, and we'll spend a good amount of time on that on the next podcast. So with that in mind, we will go ahead and we will go to our segments to wrap up the end of our podcast. And we're actually going to give you guys a double shot, not one, but two short segments to end this podcast. And one of them is pretty much completely off the cuff, and it's due to a brilliant Facebook video post that John made earlier in the week. And when I saw it, I said, this has got to be part of the podcast. And so we're just going to call this is going to be, this segment, we'll call it like tips from veteran road dog drummers. We'll call it that. And so, John, why don't you just espouse forth with your golden knowledge about this video you posted?
Well, this is all, I will preface this by saying that there was a little bit of controversy on that post, just by way of jaded people.
Man, anything that's good's going to have controversy with it. True. So,
I'm a big fan of Ludwig snare drums. I think when it comes to metal snare drums, and most people would agree, I think that if they got one thing right in the history of that company, it's their seamless metal shell drums, whatever the content of the shell, the makeup of the shell is, they're just amazing.
Well, pretty much, if you're a professional drummer and you don't own one of those, I got nothing for you.
It's really a good idea to get at least an Acrolite.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm a big proponent of lug locks, and it's largely based on just the practical side of a drum not detuning. And on a lot of gigs we do, they're long and loud, and that's just an inevitable problem. And I've used lug locks for years. I bought 1 million of them at one point, and so I'm not terribly interested in all the newfangled things out there because I have these that work. Unfortunately, Ludwig in recent years, I'd say the last 15 years, they kind of changed the makeup of their hoops. I don't know if it's just specific to snare drums, but that's typically what I play as far as Ludwig's concerned. And the problem is you put a lug lock on and it will not go flush against the wall of the hoop. There's actually enough play that it will spin if you just force it and that plastic gives. And eventually they do that. But with velocity, they'll just back out. They don't work.
As any good mechanic would say, well, there's your problem.
That's a problem, yes. And so I I put a video up about, I did a gig in Colorado the other night, and it was a backline kit, and by the grace of God, there was a Black Beauty up on the stand, which I was ecstatic about. But it was a newer one, and I knew I was going to have problems because I bring lug locks with me, among many other things. And so I just kind of, in a flippant way, said, yeah, look at this crap. And this is also born out of someone arguing with me about that a while ago. Like, oh, no, they work on Ludwig drums. I'm like, no, they don't.
They absolutely do not.
Yeah. So, basically what it comes down to is I switch out hoops on my modern. I have a Black Beauty, a couple newer acrylites, and I think a chrome over brass, and they all have different hoops on them because like a Gibraltar hoop will accommodate lug locks. Yep. And for me, psychologically, I want my stuff locked down. I don't want to be worried about that. And so, there were some opinions. The majority of people were like, yeah, that happens to me.
Oh, it absolutely. How can you
factual.
deny that?
Well,
yeah, I mean,
there's just people that want to argue for argument's sake. But nonetheless, if you buy a $700 Black Beauty, be prepared to either switch the hoops out if you want to use the traditional lug locks, or look into some alternatives. There's some out there, a bit more expensive, a bit more cumbersome. Some of them have their little quirks as well.
Right.
But that's something that just came out of nowhere that kind of was like, hey, some people aren't aware of this.
Words of wisdom, John. Words of wisdom. Well, let me say this. It's absolutely 100% true because I've got a fairly modern chrome 6.5 by 14 chrome over brass. I think it's about 2002, something like that. Had to change the hoops out on that. But I do have to do a callback, as they say in the broadcasting business, to last week's podcast with my ham-fisted windscreen on the microphone. It
was indie.
Yeah, indie. I have an indie / life hack also for the short the short lug lock on the too big or too wide hoop. I've done the old thing where I've put a little bit of gaff tape just on the end of the lug locks, and then just put them on at a weird angle or a weird cant to where the gaff tape will rest up against the hoop, and that works okay too. So there's couple solutions for you kids, you lug locking Ludwig lovers.
Well, two things quickly. One, Phil, his inner DIY indie obsession is fascinating to me. I just love watching him wrestle with that. But also, a lot of stuff, man. You got to mass produce stuff. You're going to have your issues. You're going to have your challenges. You're going to find out solutions. But, man, odds are the beauty of Facebook, put it out there like, hey, man, I'm having this problem. And 10 people are going to chime in with incredible solutions or ideas or maybe just laugh at you. But nonetheless, if you run into these kind of things, there's answers out there, or some guy who thinks he knows it all like me will tell you.
Well,
hey.
I was going to say this is also the perfect chance to tell everybody to stay in touch with us. And if you've got any questions about anything like that, we just happen to kind of, dumb upon these things and come up with our own solutions, which I'm going to give you my little quick tip of the week here in a second. But yeah, if you guys have any questions about if we've encountered this, that, or the other, please let us know, and we'll try to cover it on a podcast. Or even if you have a life hack solution that you want to give to us, we'd like to hear that as well.
I love it.
Yeah. So my little quick tip of the week is another one of these great little things to save you time, money, and heartache. And it also has to do, or you could apply it to your own kits and whatnot, but the real beauty and the real life-saving aspect of this has to do, again, when you're dealing with backline or rental kits, And that is, there's nothing worse than carting your cymbals around. You've taken them halfway around the country or the world, and you're playing on these different kits. You get to a drum set, you start taking the wing nuts off the cymbal stands, and all of a sudden, you see there's no cymbal sleeve, there's no nylon cymbal protector there. It's going to be metal on metal.
Not good.
And man, metal on metal is only good like when you're playing Slayer, right? You know?
Or,
Yeah.
sword fight. That means it's not slicing
Right.
you.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm broad in my metal on metal vision here, but
So
or I'm watching Game of Thrones a little too much.
So I'm going to tell you my solution for this. Well, you can absolutely go to the music store and grab a little pack of 5 little nylon cymbal protectors, and it's probably about $8. But if you will go to your local hardware store, like an Ace Hardware, True Value, chances are somewhere in the back of that store on a bunch of big old spools attached to the wall, you're going to find clear vinyl tubing of about 1 million different diameters. Just take your cymbal stand, like just the top part, the part where the cymbal mount is actually. Take it in there, find one that fits the diameter of that, have the attendant cut off 3 feet of that, and you will have a lifetime supply of cymbal protectors for the grand total of about $2.50.
Bam.
There you go.
Thank you, Uncle Phil.
Oh, you're welcome. And John and I both didn't even realize this, but we both, on our persons, like in our cymbal bags or whatever type of gig bag, we actually carry a handful of those with us wherever we go. Never leave home without it.
No.
Yeah. So there you go. You got remedies for Ludwig hoops with lug locks, and you got a lifetime supply of cymbal stand protectors. So, and then our last little segment of the day, and this is going to be some good stuff. We're going to do, each of us, we're going to do one of our favorite underrated drum tracks. Now, this could be a track. It could be a drum track from an unknown drummer. It could be from a very well-known drummer. But what it's not going to be is John's not going to go, oh, man, my underrated drum track is Porcaro on Rosanna. I mean, everybody knows that's a masterful drum track, you know. So now if it was a Porcaro track that not many people listen to, then it's perfectly acceptable. So I'm going to go ahead and take the bull by the horns on this one.
Knock it out.
And go ahead and use an example of a guy that everybody knows, but not everybody knows this drum track. And so my underrated drum track comes from Steve Gadd. You ever hear him?
He's did he play in like with ABBA or something like that?
I think he played the hi-hat part on Dancing Queen.
Whoever played that hi-hat part needs to be paid way more money than they were paid.
Sounds like 15-inch quick beats to me.
It sounds silky smooth to me.
So the Steve Gadd track that I'm talking about today comes actually very early in his career, before he was really Steve Gadd, so to speak. And my bet is this is back when he was playing Gretsch drums too.
Pre-Asia.
Pre-Asia, correctly.
Right.
Correct. This was
B-A?
Yes.
Before Asia.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this track is from 1974. It's from a jazz flutist. His name is Hubert Laws. It's from the album called In the Beginning. And it's a duet track between Steve Gadd and Hubert Laws. So it's flute and drums. Actually, John, it's piccolo and flute and drums. He switches off between piccolo and flute.
Right, I noticed.
Yes, and it's the track Erigen. It's a Sonny Rollins jazz standard that these guys play as a samba. Hubert Laws plays piccolo at the beginning for the melody, for the head. Steve Gadd starts out with brushes. He is a samba god on that track. He plays brushes like just a beast. Switches halfway through to sticks. By that time, Hubert's playing flute, and I mean, it's just a rip-roaring track. I mean, there's really not that much to say about it, other than it's almost like Gad's playing great samba time, but there's so much space between these two guys that it's almost like a collaborative solo all the way through.
Stunning.
Yeah, it is a brilliant track.
And there's a side of Hubert that is pretty telling as well. Like, I think a lot of people that might just sort of write him off as sort of, smooth, jazzy almost, like at the beginning of that whole. But he's really blowing on this track, and it'll shock you as well. But Steve is the star. It's insane.
You can really tell that Gad he is not playing it safe. He is searching, man, on this track, and he is finding stuff. And in that great kind of a Gad rudimental type way, man, he brings a very unique vibe to the samba. Let me go ahead and say this. It's not a traditional samba. So, I mean, don't feel like, when you guys find this track, and you can easily find it on YouTube, by the way. Easily find it on YouTube. He's very much Steve Gadd. Even though it's early Steve Gadd, he's very much Steve Gadd on that track. Yeah. So that's my great unsung track for this week. It's Origin by Hubert Laws from the In the Beginning record, Steve Gadd on drums. John, what do you have?
I have, it's kind of a record that have always just been obsessed with and loved, is a band called Little Village. And that's essentially John Hyatt's Bring the Family. It's the same band. They just kind of do an extension in a lot of ways of the vibe of that record, a little more cutting edge and a little more risky recording wise, maybe sonically and all that. But Jim is just his magic self throughout the whole record.
And by Jim, we're talking about Keltner.
Jim Keltner. I'm very sorry. I thought I prefaced that. Jim Keltner, the groove pig that is just so amazingly quirky and musical and just engaging on so many levels. But there's one track in particular that I wish more people kind of focus on. It's called Inside Job. It's kind of a funky mid-tempo thing. But there's just this lope and this somewhat unconventional approach to the groove and the sounds. And there's one fill in particular that it's basically kind of at the beginning of the chorus, it sort of happens more than once. But I without getting deep into what it is, I just encourage you to listen to a really cool track by a master at the top of his game, obviously playing with some people he's so ridiculously comfortable with, that and allow him the freedom to be quirky in that awesome way Jim is, that doesn't take away at all from the music. It's an exceptionally great track that I really want you to check out. Inside Job by Little Village.
One thing about Keltner also, just his drum sounds that he gets, brilliant. Incredible sound. And I mean, naturally that is a testament to of course, the recording process, but the person hitting them has a bit to do with it as well.
Yeah. There's just been too many incredible and unique tracks that Jim's done sonically that you have to know he's very much involved in what that is and how it translates, and focus from the word go on. I'm really hearing this, and let's find it. I think he's probably more than just about everybody I can think of. Steve Jordan's kind of up there right now sonically. He's really got his thing dialed in. But drummers in particular, I think those two, they really have kind of head and shoulders above everybody with that. And both very aware and knowledgeable and focused on getting what they're hearing in their head.
Aside from that being an underrated track or an underappreciated, you could literally say that Jim Keltner himself is underrated, underappreciated.
As crazy as that sounds,
but it's true.
Yeah.
It's absolutely true.
I mean, his discography is just insane.
On top of that, he was the inspiration for Jeff Porcaro wearing cowboy boots.
And vests.
Nips.
And probably would wear sunglasses if he wasn't blind like I am.
I thought you were talking about Porcaro.
Porcaro, yeah. He would have had the aviator sunglasses as well, but he can't see, so he had to wear real glasses. Given the choice, he would have gotten prescription aviator Ray-Bans and just gone all Jim.
Well,
and he'll admit that. That's the beauty of it.
John, I think that's a very appropriate place to end this episode.
All right.
Well, guys, thanks again for tuning in. As we talked about before, there's going to be a part B to this podcast, or a part 2 to this podcast that we're going to record. Will come to you next week. Until that time, keep it in the pocket.
Better.